Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome World War II veteran Don Gregory, and we thank him for his service to our country, but also his long-term service to our church and his service to our community. Don, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
We want to just sit and talk a little bit about your World War II experience,
Okay.
and maybe some other things as well, if you so inclined to discuss them with us, like your membership in this church, the years. I think it's about 40, 43, somewhere along there. But also about your service on our city council here in LaGrange. I was not privileged to be here at that particular time, but I know that you served 3 terms plus a little bit when you filled a vacant position, and I know that the city appreciates that, and I do too, even looking back on and hearing about your service. Well, let's talk a little bit about World War II period. You were in the Army, I believe.
That's correct, yes.
And let me ask you, were you drafted or did you volunteer?
Well, Jack, I'll tell you, I'd go back a little bit if I could.
Sure.
I finished high school when I was 16 years old.
Oh, 16.
And,
you could do that in Georgia then, couldn't you?
I was in South Carolina.
Oh, right, all right. I'm glad to clarify that too.
Anyway, I thought I was a pretty good football player. So I went to Clemson University and as a freshman and played football, but I found that there's a lot of other good football players up there too, but we were all freshmen and we did pretty well. Anyway, we were there for a year, and then it looked as though I was going to be drafted. The war was beginning to end, tail down, and it wasn't too important, I guess, to be drafted, but the draft was still on. Mm-hmm. And at that time, if you were drafted, they could keep you in the Army or the service as long as they needed you.
Yes.
If you volunteered, which I did for 18 months, and you can get out in 18 months and then go back to college, which I planned to do on the GI Bill.
Sure.
So we did that, and we were drafted. I was drafted, and took my basic at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Fort Knox.
And during some of the colder months, but it worked out fine. Since I'd had some ROTC, I was asked to help train some of the recruits at that time. Well, at the end of the recruit time,
basic training.
Yes, thank you. The company went overseas. I didn't.
Oh.
I was asked to stay at the Fort Knox to help train the next group of people coming through since I had my basic, and also since I had ROTC.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was upset. I wanted to go. I was from South Carolina. I had never been out of the state of South Carolina in my life. So I don't know. I got a little upset about it. So I can
understand that.
What I did, I went down to fill out an application, applied for the gliders.
Gliders?
The gliders, of all things. And later that evening, talking to an old veteran, he said, well, you can do that if you want to. But I'll tell you, I didn't see many people walk out when those things landed on the ground. Well, I started thinking about that, and I said, well, I don't think that's what I want to do.
Sure.
So I went down and canceled out the application, and later was transferred to Fort Meade, Maryland. It was special troops. About that time, the war was over.
Special troops.
Special troops. And I'm not real sure everything that the special troops did, but they did a lot of secret stuff at the same time.
Top secret things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I finished out my career with the Army then.
Yeah. At Fort Meade?
At Fort Meade, Maryland.
Yeah. And how long were you there?
Oh, probably almost a year, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't take any furloughs when I went in, so I was able to get out in 17 months rather than finishing up 18 months.
Yeah. I remember I was in the Navy, as I think you may know, but when I enlisted, it was for the duration of the war, I think, plus 6 months. So yours was similar to that kind
Very
of
similar,
situation.
yeah.
Very similar to that. The duration of the war.
Yeah.
You signed on for the duration of the war.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And so in 1946, it was over.
Yeah.
And you stayed another few months after that?
1946 is when I went back to college.
Okay.
Yeah.
We came back to South Carolina.
And Furman University,
Okay.
and where I met my dear wife
Okay.
on a blind date.
Good.
And,
Blind date.
Blind date.
Interesting.
And that's probably her biggest problem she's ever had in life.
Now, I have to get her side of this story. But we won't,
it was 3 years at Furman, and then went into textiles after that. And
going back to your basic training, what would you say was one of the most challenging things that you encountered during that period?
I didn't have too many challenging things. I pretty much was even keel and didn't
You're in
have
good
anything.
shape too, physically, I'm
I was
sure.
physically in good shape, and I think the most heartbreaking thing was not being able to go overseas with the company that I was basically trained with.
Yes.
But as it turned out, it was probably the best thing.
Yes.
I lost track of that particular group of people. Where they saw action or not, I'm not sure.
How long did your basic training last?
Usually
8 weeks, 10 weeks?
about 3 to 4 months. So about 3 months probably,
Yeah.
something like that.
I see. Around 12 weeks or something like that. Yeah, good. Okay.
But it was interesting and cooler weather too. And,
Fort Knox.
Fort Knox,
That's
yeah.
a pretty good sized base, isn't it?
That was the 3rd Army was
Okay.
stationed there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you keep track of any of the people that you?
No, I didn't,
Yeah,
because as you went from place to place, you kind of lose contact.
Yes.
And I didn't really. I think some of the people that I've talked to in the past maybe had a good friend that they kept in contact with, but I never did. For some unknown reason.
Well,
I don't know.
Of course, by being separated at the end there, I'm sure that had an effect on that.
Yeah.
If you had gone with them,
That's right.
you would have established some long-lasting
I
relationship.
think sometimes you build a good relationship in a foxhole.
Oh, my. Yes. And you had trained to do that sort
That's right.
of thing
Yeah.
in the field.
Yeah.
What about your basic training in the field? Did you do any maneuvers?
Oh, yes. We had a lot of maneuvers, and as I say, in the cooler months. And
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. But we'd had several maneuvers up there.
I've talked to...
Basically, it wasn't a lot of that type of thing going on, I think, because the war was
Winding down.
wasn't it? And I
Mm-hmm.
think they're beginning to change their tactics as far as how they were going to do it in the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Had you gone with your unit, would you have ended up in Europe or in the South Pacific?
I would think of Europe. I think they would go to Europe. Yeah. Europe or Korea or somewhere. Might have been Korea.
At that time?
Yeah.
But this was in the 1940s.
No, this was in 1945 and 46.
Yeah. Right at the end of the war.
At the end of the war,
officially.
Yeah. In fact, when I went into the service, it was really winding down.
Yeah. VE Day, Europe, Victory in Europe, was in May, I
And
believe,
VJ
in
Day.
1945.
Yeah.
45. And then VJ Day, Japan, was in September.
Wasn't too many months later. Yeah.
Yes.
Which was a wonderful time.
And a lot of the military personnel who were in Europe in May of 1945 got word that they were going to Japan or somewhere in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
And that was
Of course, they had to have
challenging
a
experience.
certain number for occupation
Well,
courses
yes,
there too.
yes. So you may well could have ended up over there had you gone with
Right,
your unit.
yeah.
Well, anyway, you were discharged in 1946.
Right, 46.
Went back to college.
Went back to service.
Went back to your football team. and-
No, I didn't do that.
Oh, you went to Furman.
Furman University,
you
yeah.
told me.
And,
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, they had a football team too, but I decided to try to do everything I could to get an education.
Yeah.
You know,
It was time to focus on that. That was
I
something.
wasn't going to go be an All-American or anything, so I had decided that earlier.
I know what you mean. Yes, yes. The experiences you had in the Army, even though you didn't go overseas, you could say they helped prepare you for your future life after the war. You also, I presume, were a recipient of the GI Bill because of your service.
Right.
And that was helpful, of course, in later times.
My father had passed away then, and we didn't really have a lot of money, and a lot of people didn't back in those days,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think. But it was very nice to have the GI Bill.
Yes.
In fact, I was able to finish college lacking about 2 months on my own.
I know exactly what you mean because I had the same experience. And I remember I ended up those maybe 2 or 3 months, I had 3 little jobs. 2 of them were a part of the campus service there that were arranged. You know, you could get a little job that would pay $10 a month or something like that.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of those. One of them, I remember, was simply keeping the croquet court in good shape. You know who used the croquet court? The faculty. But anyway, that was the job.
That was
and
your
I was
job,
paid
huh?
$10 for that.
Well, I would work at the post office during the Christmas holidays and things like that
Yeah.
to have some extra funds.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think back and so you reminded me of mine. Well, Don, you came home, when you came to LaGrange, I believe we said 43 years ago,
That's
something
right.
like that. I know you became a member of this church. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
You were married by that time, of course.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
we had 3 little girls.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and we came to LaGrange in '69.
1969.
Yeah, and immediately liked this area very much. With Milligan, I had moved around quite a bit in South Carolina. And coming to LaGrange, I thought, well, I'll be here about 4 years, like I've been in other places.
Yes. Milligan Company.
Milligan and Company. And after 40 odd years, we decided that this is it.
This is home.
This is home. And this church has been home too, because this is living in different towns, Spartanburg, Abbeville, Lawrence in South Carolina.
All with Milligan.
All with Milligan. This church is the finest church we had ever been in. I mean, everything was just absolutely great.
Yes.
I mean, good people, good organization, and good love for the Lord.
Yes.
I mean, it was just great.
Yes.
And,
good church to raise your children. Your
Exactly.
3 girls.
And our girls went to high school here and University of Georgia and everything. So we just loved LaGrange. And
Yes.
I had a chance probably to go back to Spartanburg if I'd wanted to, but I chose not to.
Put your roots down here
Got
in
my
LaGrange.
roots down.
Yeah.
The only problem with LaGrange is on this side of Atlanta rather than the other
Oh.
side of Atlanta, close to
A little
South
closer
Carolina,
to South
where all
Carolina.
of our family still live.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also, I know, served our city for a period of time. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, I was appointed, a gentleman had passed away, Mr. Bill Horton had passed away, and city ordinance allowed an appointment of someone within a certain months
To the city council.
to the city council.
Yes.
With a certain number of months before, and with the ordinance as it read. So Mr. Philip Cleveland talked to whomever with Milligan and had to get Mr. Milligan's approval for me to be appointed to the city council.
Yes.
But at that time, there were not any Republicans in this area, which I was one.
Yes.
And I think I maybe ended up running for as a Democrat one term, but as far as the council is concerned, it didn't really matter. So we had to get permission to do that, and it was given because that was what Callaway always did. They had someone on city council,
I see.
you know, working with
Yes.
them and the government. So Milligan wanted to do the same thing. And I enjoyed it very much. It's nice to learn a lot about local government, how it works and everything.
Yes.
And the good part about that is when somebody really needed some help, that you're able to help somebody and
Quite rewarding,
yeah,
I'm sure,
quite rewarding,
to be a part of that.
exactly.
But you were reelected. Well, you were elected, and after that first year.
I served 13 years.
13 years altogether.
Yeah.
So that 4, 8, 12, 3 terms plus that 1 year when you were appointed.
Right.
Well, that's great, Don. It's very significant, and I know you treasure that experience.
Well, it's been a good experience, and I met a lot of people with the local government that I wouldn't have probably met otherwise, and I enjoyed that.
Yes. Good. Well, Don, here we are about 70 years since the beginning of World War II, and we've been reflecting on your experience during that time, and I thank you for your willingness to do that. So is there anything else you would care to share with us before we close it?
Pretty well covered everything. My experiences were not too exciting, but
Well,
it happened that way. And,
you served your country.
That's the way it was.
You did what you actually volunteered, you might say, and did the best you could at the time.
That's right.
Then we appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank
Best
you very
wishes
much.
to you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay.